Welcome to Tech Tuesday. My name is Abby Ritchie. I'm the host of the show and the founder of Senior Savvy. You can find me every Tuesday right here interviewing people who are engaged and invested in the age tech innovation space as it relates to senior living. Today, I've got a wonderful guest lined up for you. But before we get started, let's go ahead and run our intro. I want to invite my guest on right away. Bob Kramer, welcome to Tech Tuesday.
Thank you, Abby. I'm delighted to be with you. Look forward to our conversation.
Me too, me too. If you're not already familiar with Bob Kramer, you should be. Bob is the founder of aging services think tank, Nexus Insights, as well as the co-founder, former president, and CEO of the current senior advisor to the National Investment Center of Seniors Housing and Care. He also is at many conferences, both in senior living and outside of senior living, talking on topics that are impacting senior living today. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. I'm thrilled that you're here today.
Thanks so much, Abby. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Today, we're going to talk about technology and how it's influencing senior living operators. And what I want to know from you is what you're seeing that operators are doing right and what are they missing the boat on?
Well, that's a broad question. I think first of all, we have to recognize that for operators, they've in a sense had to bounce from crisis to crisis, where sheer survival, physical survival of residents and staff,
Yeah.
and as well as just and many operators have said to me they feel like they and their teams from the front line through the C-suite are suffering from PTSD,
Mhm.
post-traumatic stress disease, because there's a lot of physical, emotional, mental exhaustion out there. And then on top of that, frankly, also financial fatigue. Because of, if you think about it, we had the first event was COVID.
Yeah.
And COVID that lasted, it seemed like forever. And in fact, is still with us. And we've had to learn from it. Secondly, then we had the workforce challenge. Then thirdly, on top of that, we've had um, inflation, supply chain issues, and with that, just a complete capital markets upheaval. And so when you put all that together, it's understandable that many are feeling exhausted. But to answer your question, Abby, your really good question, I think what operators are doing well is what they do every day, and that is to meet the needs of their residents and their staff. What can happen, though, in the midst of a crisis and what seems like a perpetual crisis over now the last 3 years, is that you're so engaged with a crisis, whether it's COVID, workforce, financial crisis, capital markets meltdown, that you neglect to really build the future, to plan
Mhm.
for the future. And
Mhm.
when it comes, for instance, now, it's absolutely critical for operators of seniors housing and care to think, okay, what's the future? How's my customer going to be different? What are they going to expect of me differently? And to your topic, technology, what does this mean? Do I really have a technology plan for the future? How does that, is it just kind of a, oh gee, we're going to invest in a system here and or do I really have a strategy and a plan for how technology of 2023 and beyond, not of 1993 or even of 2019, is
Yeah.
going to help inform and guide and enable me to deliver what I need to deliver in the future to my residents and to my staff.
It actually sounds like a daunting task, right? Like, wow, because you have to have one foot constantly in your community and on a day-to-day basis and another in the future and how you're going to run that. Would you recommend that some operators engage a consultant to help them with this?
I think a consultant can be very, very helpful. Um, what I would also recommend is overall, I think operators, and I think we discovered this during COVID,
Mhm.
operators need one another.
Mm.
And you can't go to all the conferences out there. I mean, today, one of the illustrations of how our field has grown is you could go to 3 conferences every week
Yeah.
and still not go to all the conferences, but
Mhm.
you have a company to run. So
Right.
one of the things I would say is I think I'm seeing more and more groups of operators getting together to informally, off the record share. All right, what are you seeing and how are you addressing it?
Mm.
What's working? What isn't working? And I think that in technology and in so many areas, I think that value of getting together with 5 to 10 other operators,
Mhm.
and if you're in charge of sales, then getting together with other people in sales. And so I think those that type of that can be enormously helpful. That said, I do think there are folks out there, like uh, Darren Lagrange, and others, that I think can be enormously helpful for an operator having a strategy. But finally, too, you're going to have somebody on your senior leadership team that really gets this and is thinking about this, not
Mm.
just evaluating the latest technology, but
Mhm.
really having a long-term strategy and then adjusting it as new breakthroughs come out.
Yes, so, so valuable. I can see that entirely. Well, that sounds like a great mission. And I know Senior Living Foresight is planning on creating a technology conference later this summer, pretty much focusing on those topics. So great. And
Hmm.
we'll be talking more about that. And so, in regards to conferences, though, because I know that you've attended many of them, which ones would you say are most helpful for operators in this situation?
Well, again, I think it depends a lot on the operator and what issues you're looking for insights on, and then
Mhm.
where are you looking for those insights? In other words, are you wanting to deal with just day to day, what I'll call the day to day operations issues? And you may find an Argentum conference, or if you're not for profit, a leading age conference, or an American Healthcare Association NCAL conference. Are you looking at sort of bigger trends and how those trends impact? Well, then you may say, gee, I want to go to an ASHA meeting. Or if you're really into innovation, then and you want to hear fresh and different ideas from outside the space, you might go to a SLIF, Senior Living Innovation Forum. And so there, but the bottom line is, again, you can't go to all the conferences out there and you can't spend all your time going to
Yeah.
conferences. So therefore, I would look for settings and places, whether
Mhm.
it's newsletters, blogs, and also the opportunity to get together with some other operators
Yeah.
at whatever is your area of responsibility, whether it's the C suite, whether it's sales and marketing, whether it's operations, where you can compare notes. We learned during COVID how valuable it is to work with others in the industry and not see one another as competitors, as
Mhm.
if, somehow or another, by sharing my secret sauce,
Yeah.
I'm basically helping out my competitor and hurting me. That wasn't the case during COVID, and
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be the case going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you saying that, and I also appreciate the participation that we're getting in the chat. Just people saying how much discussion and collaboration really does add to the conversation. So I do appreciate that. You know, you do attend a lot of these conferences. In fact, I was recently, I heard you speak at a recent Asha, and I really appreciated how you did a panel there. And it was like it was a rotation of ideas and input, not only for the people who were on the panel, but for the people who were in the audience. Is that something that you do a lot of these
I
days?
do some of it. To me, again, uh, asking the right questions
Mhm.
and pulling out people's expertise that sometimes they don't even realize they have
Yeah.
is incredibly important. I think one of the things I've learned, honestly, as I've gotten older,
Mhm.
is what I don't know and how important it is to ask good questions and be a good listener. And I think that's part of when you facilitate as a moderator or a host a session. I actually thought, Abby, to your comment on that Asha technology session, I thought the really best part of the entire session was when we got to the audience participation
Yeah.
and the number of operators who spoke up and the comments that they made. And we got real really quickly. And there were some excellent suggestions. And there was an energy level there of hearing these folks comment and the things they said, gee, we need to do as an industry, as opposed
Mhm.
to just, I need to do this. One of the comments was, again, it's impossible. Well, I mean, it's very difficult to stay up on all the latest trends, A,
Mhm.
and B, it's really hard to have the scale and the bandwidth, time-wise and dollar-wise, to for each operator to go out and create their own platform. So if you remember in that discussion, one of the things Sie- Sevi Petrus,
Yeah.
Priority Life Care, Lynn Katzman, Juniper Communities, obviously Brenda, who was on the panel with the Springs Living.
Yeah.
One of the discussions there was how can we do approach some of this together? Could we
Mhm.
have some shared learnings, and even shared platforms? Because the average operator who has, let's say, 5 to 25 properties,
Mhm.
the kinds of investments that you may need to make in a technology platform, it's really hard to have the expertise to do them, and B, frankly, have the financial wherewithal.
Yeah.
So to me, that was an exciting discussion.
Mhm.
And we need to have more of this kind of candor and this
Mhm.
kind of how do we move the whole sector forward. We saw what was possible during COVID. It was a tragedy. It was incredibly painful. But for instance, as you've heard me say before, we were forced to come kicking and screaming into the
Yeah.
modern era of digital communication.
Mhm.
We were forced to discover the world in senior living that
Yeah.
has been discovered before in retail, for instance, and in food service of on-demand services.
Yeah.
And so we discovered telehealth. We
Mhm.
discovered remote patient monitoring. We discovered all these things that could be delivered
Mhm.
into our seniors' bedroom and living room in our community, as opposed to having to ship them out.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? The new customer that we're increasingly going to see, the latter half of what's called the silent generation, and then the boomers, the oldest of whom is 77, they're
Mhm.
used to end on demand services and they're even more used to it after COVID. So
Yeah.
they're going to expect that in any senior community that they're part of. That's going to be table stakes, not something new and novel.
100%. And the way I've heard you talk about this is the boomer daughter, right?
Hmm.
You've referred to her as she helped her parents get situated in a nice home,
Yeah.
but she herself does not want to be part of that same home that her parents lived in.
Yeah. Well, I sometimes describe it in terms of the previous generation that really was the generation we've served in this period of basically from the 1990s through until today. That is often referred to, particularly in terms of the greatest generation. They had what I call accidental longevity. They never expected to live as long as they did.
Mhm.
And on top of that, it was the first generation where their daughters were now overwhelmingly in the workforce.
Yeah.
Prior to the greatest generation, if you happened to be fortunate enough to live long, your daughter or your daughter-in-law took care of you. That was
Yeah.
her role.
Mhm.
Now, as I've commented, particularly what the assisted living and independent living were around before the 1990s. But
Mhm.
what drove the growth of assisted living was the boomer daughter, because
Mhm.
she was now in the workforce and she couldn't live with the guilt of putting her mom in the old institutional nursing home.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she didn't want to give up her job. And
Mhm.
along came places like Paul and Terry Clausen's Sunrise Victorian Mansions, Queen Anne furniture, carpets, a curved staircase, and a gorgeous atrium with a chandelier. Now, you never would want mom to use that staircase, but you
Right.
weren't marketing to mom. You
Yeah.
were marketing to the boomer daughter. But the boomer daughter, now she wants purposeful longevity. She
Right.
knows that she may well live well past her 70s into her 80s, 90s, or longer. And she wants to live in a setting that's going to not just put years in her life, but it's going to put life in her years.
Right on.
And so
Yeah.
she's looking for the sorts of setting that's going to put that life in her years. And to a great extent, she's going to be looking for settings that are going to enable her to avoid totally, or for as long as possible, ever getting, quote, put into assisted living, because
100%.
of what that connotates. It
Mhm.
connotes a sense of loss of independent agency. And that's not something boomers are going to just willingly, like lemmings to the sea, said, well, if you've got these communities and this is what being old means, we're delighted to move in. Wrong.
Right.
They're going to totally disrupt what we think of senior living and senior care. And quite frankly, our previous products were about things that we did for and provided to older
Mhm.
adults. With boomers, it's going to be about more doing things with them and having things done by them. And
Mhm.
that's a huge, huge change.
Yeah. This is very personal to me when I hear you talk about the boomer daughter because that's my mom. And I want to share something personal with you. And it's partially why I do what I do. In the early 2000s, like 2002, my grandparents both started a demise. And my mom, it was and is an entrepreneur, and she did not want to give up her company,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so we did everything we could collectively as a family to find the best place to put our grandparents in, right? Where they
Yeah.
would be comfortable. And they did not have CCRCs. And so what we experienced at that time was a decline from them moving into a very nice assisted living home to them having to be moved to a nursing home. And that was really traumatic on
Yeah.
our family to experience. And I know that my mom at this point wants nothing to do with that
Yeah.
scenario,
Yeah.
right? And would prefer to age at home and has set herself up and dad as well to do just that.
Well, and again, for many boomers, the experience they went through with their parents is their rallying cry for what they don't want.
Yeah.
For instance, if you even think about the phrase senior living and
Hmm.
senior care, Abby, I would argue, first of all, when you use the word senior, you're identifying with the wrong generation, because boomers hate the word senior. Secondly, senior care is seen as patronizing and condescending. It connotes I've lost independent agency and
Mm.
now I have to be cared for. And even senior living, for some boomers, and particularly boomer daughters, it represents more senior dying than senior living. So
Mm.
I've said how I think our future settings, if we're going to attract boomers, are going to be aspirational settings, not avoidance settings.
Mm.
Avoidance settings are places where you go, I sure hope I can avoid having to be there for as long as possible.
Right.
Aspirational settings say, wow, that's, I'd love to live in a place like that that had that much going on,
Hmm.
that was with people who had similar interests to me and similar passions.
Hmm.
And so I think that aspirational settings where they pull you in
Yeah.
versus avoidance settings where you are pushed out of the home you want to stay in desperately, but you just can't safely live there any longer. So
Hmm.
I think the challenge for us is how we begin to offer aspirational settings that pull people in because of basically the the lifestyle that we offer that gives them a sense of purpose and
Yeah.
engagement and being connected, as opposed to a sense of, you know, you're losing it. Aging is about deficits and decline, and in your decline, we take care of you. A very unattractive ultimate picture.
Mhm.
And so I think that that whole paradigm of what our setting is about. Now, when we do it well, we provide the very things I just talked about.
Yeah.
But most people see our settings as care-driven settings that you only move to when you absolutely can't live any longer without the care. And of
Mhm.
course, with technology, many people now believe they can live much longer, if not till the end of their life, just staying in their home with
Yeah.
new technology. But what they miss is what our ultimate value proposition. Ultimate value proposition is that we provide a sense of community and
Mhm.
purpose. We
Mhm.
give you a reason to get up for breakfast,
Mhm.
and that reason is about either rediscovering or being able to refire what gives you a sense of purpose and connection and belonging.
Yeah.
That's senior living at its best, which is aspirational living rather than just simply we have the care when you absolutely can't live any longer without it.
Yeah. Last week on the show, we had Anna Hall on talking about the purpose equation
Hmm.
and how vital that is to just reconnecting to what your purpose is. And that was a great topic. And that's something that senior communities definitely can provide. And he, I live here in Phoenix, and we have some of the most beautiful and most connected communities
Hmm.
that you would want to live in that are aspirational.
Well, and I think understand too that with boomers, as they've done throughout their lives, they will associate with the folks they want to associate with. And they will force, in that sense, the market to respond to them. I've talked about different themes that aren't mutually exclusive, but these are themes that will attract people into community.
Hmm.
One of them, for instance, is Wellnessville. And
Hmm.
that is where basically there's a sense of wellness and well-being. And basically, I want to live a lifestyle that's going to, again, put life in my years, but really do the things that are enabling me to have my health span as nearly as possible match my lifespan. And then I've talked about also the Serviceville. And Serviceville is where the idea of volunteering, mentoring, caregiving,
Hmm.
teaching. But that sense, again, I'm making a difference in someone else's life, and that gives me a sense of purpose. I've talked about Collegeville, which is not just lifelong learning, but it's
Hmm.
learning for a long life, as Chip Conley likes to talk about it. And so it's a sense of both for many boomers, college, unlike for the greatest generation, for my parents, my wife's parents, World War II and the Korean War were a defining experience. For many boomers, their defining socialization experience was college. Well, then going back to college, but the going back to college in terms of learning, but in terms of both teaching and taking courses, and
Hmm.
that sense of learning new skills. Um, so that's Collegeville, and then there's what I call Changeville, which is basically about social change and social action. And for many boomers, not all, but for some boomers, that's going to be very attractive. And so whether it's ecological footprint and awareness, global warming, whether it's local education issues, whether it's DE&I and a sense of belonging, but whether they're national, global, or local issues, it's about being an agent of social change. And for some communities, that's going to be very attractive.
Hmm.
Um, and then you also have, another aspect of this is Funville. Why do
Margaritaville, right?
Margaritaville, also Disney's announced
Uh-huh.
planned communities. Now, again, for some people, that's too much emphasis on fun. It
Yeah.
almost sounds like live, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But it's a recognition that, you don't want to be all serious about all
Hmm.
the ills of the world and how you're going to change them. you also want to have fun. So Funville, Wellnessville, Changeville, Serviceville,
Yeah.
Collegeville, these are all different themes that are not, as I said, mutually exclusive, but different communities.
Mhm.
Part of it is you want to be around people that share similar passions and similar interests.
Yeah.
And that's not going to change. I was contacted a number of months ago by a woman who is plugged in with all the Beatles fan clubs, and she was exploring the idea of basically having a life plan community for Beatles music lovers. And I said, well, that's an interesting idea. Would it have staying power once you filled up the first time? But again, all this has to do with the Japanese have an expression ikigai, which
Okay.
which literally translates to reason to get up for breakfast, but it
Mhm.
really means what gives you a sense of purpose each day as a reason to get up and get going. And ultimately, once we had one of our Nick Talk speakers who once challenged people in our industry, and she said, um, Lisa Marsh Ryerson, she said, you need to stop thinking about your activities directors as just organizing games and activities to pass the day. You need to rename them purpose matchmakers because their role, and Dr. Bill Thomas, one of my Nexus fellows, calls it difference makers.
Mhm.
But it's connecting people, what gives them a sense of making a difference in the
Mhm.
world, which
Mhm.
can be as simple as making a difference in their neighbor's life, in their grandchild's life. But
Mhm.
that's what basically puts more life in our years. And
Yeah.
that's what our sector really, if we're going to attract boomers, it's because we're really good at creating the settings that do that.
I love it. I love it. And for those who were with us last week, this topic just piggybacks on that so beautifully. Bob, I know we're getting short on time, and I want to ask you one other thing because you do, especially if you have the time today, you do have a very unique perspective on the staffing crisis that I would love to hear more about in regards to immigrants. Do you have time to share that with us?
Sure, a couple of things. One, again, one of the silver linings, as
Hmm.
hard and as tragic for many that COVID has been, is that it has forced operators to care about what happens to their staff after and before their shifts,
Yeah.
and to move from a transactional relationship where I need the following tasks done in your 8 or 12 hour shift to really thinking about them as people, and what are
Mhm.
the issues you bring when you come to work and what are the issues you go home to. And that kind of relationship built on empathy, understanding, and operators can't solve all those problems, but they can understand them and be part of the solution. And that creates stickiness. That lowers turnover.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes specifically to immigrants, there's such opportunity. Now, bear in mind, enormous barriers in terms of the time to get people into the country. But um, many immigrants come from cultures that have a really different view than our culture in two ways. One, how do they view elders? Do they esteem them? Are they highly valued in their culture? Whereas in the American culture, we've glorified being young. Part of
Mhm.
that is the boomers. They themselves have done this now to themselves. But but cultures that esteem elders and see them as, in a sense, the voices of wisdom and the voices of knowledge. And
Yeah.
then secondly, many immigrants come from cultures that esteem serving others,
Mhm.
whereas much in our culture, in a sense, degrades this. Like, you're a loser because you're just, in a sense, clearing tables or serving or waiting on caring for people. But
Yeah.
there are cultures where service of others, A, and B, particularly serving the elders in your society, are esteemed. And
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons why so many immigrants are incredible caregivers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's an example. If we have just one moment, I'll
Sure.
share that I've
Please.
I've shared before. but uh, Goodwin Living in Northern Virginia. Uh, One resident got talking with a longtime dining room server who seemed to be a little bit down, and
Mhm.
she asked him, John, you're so upbeat. What's this? What's got you down today? And he said, well, I've been trying for years to get the time and save the money to study for and pass the citizenship exam to get my U.S. citizenship, and they keep raising the fees and they keep making the exam more difficult. And this woman, a resident in a life plan community, says, gee, we ought to be able to do something about this. We've
Mhm.
got a lot of people with college degrees and master's degrees and PhDs, and many of us were teachers. Well, now, fast forward a couple of years later, Goodwin Living, 149 immigrants are now, as employees of Goodwin Living, have either received or on their path to getting citizenship. The residents working with management have raised $10,000 for every single one of those immigrants to pay for them to
Mhm.
basically be able to apply for citizenship. And two, the residents, again with the support of the administration, have organized the tutoring with schedules that management works out with the immigrants to tutor all 149 of this. And guess what? Front page article in the Washington Post.
Mhm.
You don't think there are thousands of immigrants in the DC area and their family that have heard about it that want to work at Goodwin Living. And
Yeah.
you want to create a sense of connection between
Mhm.
residents and staff that reduces turnover. You want to create a sense of belonging and purpose for the residents. They're making a difference in people's lives, people's they see every day. And there are other examples like that. But to me, that's an example of immigrants making a difference,
Mhm.
residents making a difference, a provider realizing the opportunity and helping to solve their own workforce challenge.
So valuable. I just have chills all over, and I know so many other people do as well. And when you're able to make a connection like that and solve problems on so many levels, that's really incredibly rewarding. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, so many people have just chimed in here today, and this is going to be my last comment, my last question. Like you have shared so much, and you receive a lot of accolades, a lot of rewards, a lot of compliments. Does it get tiring? Is it weird? Are you totally comfortable with it?
Well, I think a couple things. One, with one award recently, when I was asked to give a few remarks, I pointed out that, and I was in a room where uh, there were about 30 other people with me who were being honored, Abby.
Mhm.
And I said, every single one of us being honored tonight stands on someone else's shoulders and
Mhm.
probably several people. We wouldn't be here tonight if it weren't for the people who are our inspiration and the
Yeah.
people that poured into us and mentored us. And
Mhm.
I said, secondly, we all know the challenges of workforce from top to bottom in our industry, and we desperately need to attract people. And I said, my challenge was then, okay, first of all, thank the people whose shoulders you stand on.
Yeah.
That helps with humility. And secondly, be really conscious. There should be at least 10 people who are standing on your shoulders.
Mm.
That means mentoring. That means time invested in other people's lives. And so I think those two things, you know, it helps. The recognition is wonderful, but ultimately you want to inspire others because what we do individually is nothing d- compared to what we can do as a community.
Yeah.
We came together during COVID. Well, there
Mhm.
are great lessons learned there. And whether it's the financial markets challenge now, whether it's the workforce challenge, whether it's the COVID challenge, uh, and more broadly in society, we're more fractured as a society than we've ever been. And so in that kind of situation, how do we thank and show appreciation for the people that have made us who we are today? And then secondly, are we giving back? Are we investing back in others? You know, two-thirds of my fellows at Nexus Insights are a generation younger than me, and that's
Mhm,
deliberate.
mhm,
I want a platform where because I believe these fellows are the individuals who are going to be among the leaders of the next generation of what we do in aging services and specifically in housing and care for older adults. So to me, that's kind of a philosophy.
yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I know people who are watching this and will be watching it, as well as the participants today, everyone has been touched and enriched. So we thank you for your participation. If someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can do that?
They can come both to Nexus Insights, nexusinsights.net, up there on the screen. They can also go to NIC, nic.org. And
Mhm,
in both places, they'll find not only a lot of things that I've written and said and podcasts and so forth, but also other fellows at Nexus and other staff members and board members at NIC. So those would be two great resources, nic.org and nexusinsights.net. And, you know, let's continue to work together to
yeah.
create ultimately what we're talking about, Abby. And I'll just leave you with this comment.
Okay.
We're talking about disrupting and a revolution in how we think about the experience of getting old and of aging. And as we disrupt that, we will change the lived experience of aging in America. And that's what we need to do. That's what I want to do for my wife and myself, but just as much for my kids and my grandchildren, who I know statistically are likely to live even longer than I
Mhm.
will. So thanks for having me on today. Great to have this opportunity to chat with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. And we're going to go ahead and rebroadcast this again later and tomorrow. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And we are honored by your presence today. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you back here next week.